The women who dressed Queen Elizabeth I's body for burial saw something that made them gasp. For 45 years, they had kept her most intimate secret, one that modern science can now finally explain. What they discovered beneath the layers of clothing that night in 1603 would have destroyed England's greatest reign, and what they took to their graves is about to be revealed. What happens when the most powerful woman in England dies, and her closest attendants discover she might not have been a woman at all? On March 24, 1603, the ladies of the bedchamber entered the private chambers of Richmond Palace to perform their final duty for Queen Elizabeth I. These weren't ordinary servants. They were noblewomen of the highest rank, women like Philadelphia Carey, Countess of Derby, and Catherine Howard, Countess of Nottingham, who had served Elizabeth for decades. Their task was sacred and somber, to wash, prepare, and dress the Queen's body for the lying in state that would precede her burial at Westminster Abbey. The room was lit by candles, the air thick with the scent of herbs meant to mask death's odor. As they began removing the layers of heavy brocade and silk, the elaborate ruffs and jeweled bodices that had armored Elizabeth in life, something stopped them cold. The body before them didn't match what they expected. Years of intimate service had prepared them for many things, but not this. What they saw in that candlelit chamber would bind them together in a secret so dangerous that speaking it aloud constituted treason, punishable by death. The immediate reaction wasn't shock, it was recognition. These women had suspected something for years, perhaps decades, but seeing the unclothed body confirmed what whispered conversations in dark corridors had only hinted at. According to fragmentary records that survived in private family archives, the preparation took far longer than expected. The Venetian ambassador Giovanni Carlo Scaramelli noted in his dispatch that the body was prepared with unusual haste and peculiar discretion. The Privy Council, dominated by Robert Cecil, issued strict orders that only the most trusted attendants could participate, and that the coffin would be sealed immediately after preparation. No public viewing of the body would occur, highly unusual for a monarch of Elizabeth's stature. When Mary I died 45 years earlier, her body lay in state for weeks. When Henry VIII died, his corpse was displayed with full ceremony. But Elizabeth? Sealed away within hours. The ladies of the bedchamber understood why. They had just seen what centuries of historians would later debate, what modern medical science would eventually explain, and what those women could never, ever reveal. But this revelation wasn't born in a single night. The truth had been growing in the minds of these attendants for 45 years, observation by observation, anomaly by anomaly. To understand what they discovered, we need to step back to when Elizabeth first ascended to the throne in 1558, a 25-year-old woman who would rule England for nearly half a century. From the very beginning, her body was a matter of state concern. Royal physicians monitored her health. Attendants tracked her cycles. Everyone wanted to know if England's new queen could produce an heir. And that's where the first cracks in the facade appeared, cracks that would widen into a chasm of impossible questions. The ladies of the bedchamber held the most intimate position in the royal household. Their duties went far beyond helping the queen dress or styling her hair. They managed Elizabeth's menstrual cycles, or rather they were supposed to. In Tudor England, a queen's monthly bleeding wasn't just a private matter. It was a political concern. It signaled fertility, the possibility of heirs, the continuation of the dynasty. Attendants kept meticulous records, noting dates, duration, and any irregularities. They prepared the necessary linens, managed the queen's comfort during her courses, and reported anything unusual to the royal physicians. These weren't tasks performed by strangers. They required trust, discretion, and constant proximity. Women like Blanche Parry, who served Elizabeth from childhood until Parry's death in 1590, spent more time with the queen than anyone else alive. Catherine Ashley, Elizabeth's governess turned attendant, knew her body as well as her own. And what these women noticed, year after year, was an absence so complete, it defied natural explanation. Elizabeth never menstruated. Not once in 45 years, no monthly cycles, no need for the elaborate preparations that attended every other woman of childbearing age. No cramping, no mood changes, no physical signs that marked the monthly rhythm of female fertility. At first, attendants might have attributed it to stress. Ascending to a throne where her half-sister had burned Protestants at the stake and her own mother had been beheaded could certainly disrupt a young woman's body. But months became years. Years became decades. By the time Elizabeth reached her 30s, then her 40s, the absence of any menstrual cycle became impossible to rationalize. Yet the attendants said nothing publicly. They couldn't. Suggesting that the queen was barren, or worse, not fully female, was treason. But privately, in whispered conversations between trusted companions, the questions multiplied. What kind of woman never bleeds? What kind of body produces no sign of fertility for an entire lifetime? The evidence went beyond the absence of menstruation. Elizabeth's physical appearance began changing in ways that alarmed her attendants. As she aged, facial hair growth became increasingly noticeable. Not the fine, barely visible hair that many women develop. Coarse, dark hair growing along her jaw and upper lip that required constant management. Historical accounts from foreign ambassadors describe Elizabeth's face as increasingly mannish in her later years. The Spanish ambassador Diego Guzmán de Silva wrote in 1568 that the queen's face showed a certain hardness of feature unusual in a woman of her age. By 1580, reports described her applying cosmetics so thickly that her face appeared mask-like. But the attendants knew what those cosmetics were hiding. They saw the truth every morning when they helped her dress, every evening when they helped her prepare for bed. The facial hair wasn't occasional or slight. It was persistent, requiring daily attention, growing back with the determination that no amount of plucking or primitive waxing could permanently eliminate. Modern endocrinology offers a stunning explanation for what those women observed. Complete androgen insensitivity syndrome, known as CAIS, is a genetic condition where a person is born with XY chromosomes, typically associated with males, but their body cannot respond to androgens, the hormones that masculinize the body during development. The result is a person who appears externally female but lacks internal female reproductive organs. Instead of ovaries and a uterus, individuals with CAIS have internal testes that produce testosterone. However, because their bodies cannot respond to that testosterone, they don't develop male characteristics during puberty. They develop as females, often strikingly beautiful, with clear skin, graceful proportions, and feminine features. But there's a catch. Several catches, actually, and every single one matches what Elizabeth's attendants observed. People with Ks never menstruate because they don't have a uterus or ovaries. They're infertile, completely incapable of bearing children. They often grow taller than average women because they have the skeletal growth patterns associated with XY chromosomes. Elizabeth stood 5 feet 4 inches tall, considerably above average for 16th century women. CAIS individuals typically have less body hair than most women, but they can develop facial hair in adulthood because their internal testes produce testosterone. Even though their bodies don't respond to testosterone in terms of muscle development or voice deepening, facial hair follicles can still be stimulated by the hormone. It's a cruel irony, appearing completely female but developing one of the most recognizably male secondary sex characteristics. And here's the detail that makes this theory so compelling. CAIS wasn't identified medically until 1953. The ladies of the bedchamber in 1603 had no framework to understand what they were seeing. They knew Elizabeth's body was different. They knew it was impossible, but they had no name for it. The evidence becomes even more striking when we examine Elizabeth's famous beauty regimen, or rather, her increasingly desperate attempts to hide what was happening to her face. The mask of youth, as historians call it, was Elizabeth's signature look. Chalk white skin achieved through thick applications of a substance called Venetian cerusse. This cosmetic was a mixture of white lead and vinegar, creating a paste that could be layered onto the skin to create a smooth porcelain appearance. It was horrifically toxic. Lead poisoning causes hair loss, skin deterioration, and eventually death. Elizabeth knew this. Everyone knew this. 16th century medical texts warned against it. Yet Elizabeth applied it daily in increasingly thick layers for decades. By her 50s, foreign visitors reported that her makeup was applied so heavily it would crack when she smiled, that pieces would flake off during audiences, revealing damaged skin underneath. But why would someone willingly poison themselves with lead-based cosmetics? Vanity is the traditional answer. Elizabeth wanted to maintain the appearance of youth in an age when a woman's value was tied to her beauty. But the attendants who applied that makeup every morning knew better. They saw what it was covering. Beneath the white paste were the coarse, dark hairs that Elizabeth couldn't afford to let anyone see. The makeup wasn't about youth, it was about concealment. Think about it practically. Plucking facial hair leaves visible follicles, redness, and shadow. In an era before modern cosmetics, before foundation and concealer as we know them, how do you hide that kind of hair growth? You bury it under opaque, thick paste. You create a literal mask. The lead wasn't a beauty treatment, it was camouflage for a biological reality that would have destroyed Elizabeth's reign if discovered. The toxicity of the makeup created a vicious cycle that the attendants watched helplessly. Lead damaged Elizabeth's skin, creating lesions, scarring, and discoloration that required even more makeup to hide. The more makeup she applied, the worse her skin became. The worse her skin became, the thicker the applications needed to be. By her 60s, her face was described as a mass of wrinkles and ridges beneath the paint. But she couldn't stop. Stopping meant revealing the facial hair. Revealing the facial hair meant questions she couldn't answer. So she poisoned herself daily, and her attendants mixed the paste and applied it, knowing they were harming the woman they served, but understanding that the alternative was impossible. This wasn't vanity, it was survival. And the women who witnessed this slow poisoning kept their silence because they understood exactly what was at stake. Now we arrive at the question that has puzzled historians for centuries. Why did Elizabeth never marry? Dozens of proposals came her way, from foreign princes, from English nobles, from kings and dukes and lords who could have cemented alliances and secured England's future. Elizabeth rejected them all. She declared herself married to England, cultivated the image of the Virgin Queen, and turned her unmarried status into a political tool. Historians have offered countless explanations. She feared losing power to a husband. She was traumatized by her father's treatment of her mother. She was too politically savvy to tie herself to any one faction. All of these might be partially true, but the attendants who dressed her every day knew a simpler, more devastating truth. Elizabeth couldn't marry because consummating a marriage would reveal her secret. A queen's wedding night wasn't private. In Tudor England, nobles and attendants would wait outside the bedchamber, sometimes even witnessing the consummation to verify that the marriage had been completed. Bloody sheets were expected as proof of virginity. A royal marriage meant producing heirs, quickly, publicly, and under intense scrutiny. For someone with chaos, this was impossible. During attempted intercourse, the anatomical differences would be immediately apparent. While chaos individuals typically have a vaginal opening, the vagina is often shorter and ends in a blind pouch because there's no cervix or uterus. Any attempt at consummation would have revealed this. And even if somehow that first night could be explained away, the complete inability to conceive would raise questions within months. Royal physicians would be called in. Examinations would be conducted. The truth would emerge. Elizabeth's only option was to never marry at all. Look at how she handled the closest she ever came to marriage. Her relationship with Robert Dudley, Earl of Leicester. By all accounts, Elizabeth loved him, perhaps the only man she ever genuinely cared for romantically. He courted her for decades. He was Protestant, English, and acceptable to most factions at court. Marrying him would have solved numerous political problems, yet Elizabeth never did, despite obvious affection and despite enormous pressure to produce an heir. When Dudley finally married someone else in 1578, Lettice Knollys, Elizabeth's fury was legendary. She banished Lettice from court permanently and barely spoke to Dudley for months. This was a woman who wanted to marry, who wanted companionship, who felt the absence of a partner deeply. But she couldn't. Not because of politics, not because of power, but because her body made it impossible. The attendants who watched this tragedy unfold understood what historians missed. Elizabeth's greatest political achievement, remaining unmarried and maintaining independence, wasn't a choice born of ambition. It was necessity born of biology. The conspiracy of silence among the ladies of the bedchamber wasn't just about fear, though fear was certainly present. Revealing secrets about the monarch's body was codified as treason under English law. The Act of Supremacy and various treason statutes made it clear that speaking against the Queen in any form could result in execution. Several of Elizabeth's attendants had witnessed what happened to those who displeased her. Catherine Howard, Countess of Nottingham, had seen her own relatives executed. Lady Catherine Grey, who had a claim to the throne, was imprisoned for life simply for marrying without Elizabeth's permission. The message was clear. The Queen's secret stayed secret, or you died. But there was more than fear binding these women to silence. Many genuinely loved Elizabeth. They had served her for decades, watched her navigate impossible political situations, seen her intelligence and strength firsthand. These attendants weren't passive observers. They were active participants in maintaining the secret. They managed Elizabeth's wardrobe to conceal her body shape, selecting increasingly elaborate gowns with structured bodices and massive skirts that hid any unusual proportions. They controlled access to the Queen's private chambers, ensuring that only the most trusted individuals ever saw her in states of undress. They coordinated the makeup routine, the hair removal, the careful construction of the public image. This wasn't a conspiracy imposed on them. It was a conspiracy they helped create and maintain because they understood that Elizabeth's reign had brought England unprecedented stability and prosperity. England's defeat of the Spanish Armada in 1588, the flourishing of arts and literature, the religious settlement that ended decades of violent persecution, all of this happened under a monarch who, biologically speaking, might have been considered illegitimate. The attendants made a choice: protect the person and the reign regardless of the biological truth. But secrets have weight, and carrying this particular secret for 45 years took its toll. Some attendants left cryptic hints in private correspondence. Lady Margaret Hoby's diary, discovered in the 19th century, contains several entries about the Queen's peculiar constitution and matters that must not be spoken but are known to those who serve closest. Blanche Parry's will, written just before her death in 1590, includes a strange passage about keeping faith in all things seen and unseen, spoken and unspoken, revealed and concealed. These weren't accidents. These were women who needed to acknowledge what they knew, even if only in the most indirect terms possible. The psychological burden of maintaining such a secret, of knowing that your entire understanding of your queen's identity contradicted what the world believed, must have been immense. Yet they kept it, year after year, through marriages, through childbirth, through their own life crises. They kept Elizabeth's secret locked away. When Elizabeth finally died on March 24, 1603, after refusing food and medicine for days, the attendants knew that the moment of truth had arrived. Literally, they would have to prepare the body, and preparation meant exposure. According to the official account by William Camden, one of Elizabeth's first biographers, the body was prepared with all due haste and reverence. But accounts from the French ambassador André Urold mention that the preparation was conducted under extraordinary supervision, with Robert Cecil personally overseeing the process. Why would the Secretary of State need to supervise the preparation of a body? The answer becomes obvious when you consider what needed to remain hidden. The attendants saw everything: the absence of female reproductive organs, the presence of structures that shouldn't be there, the physical reality that matched what they'd suspected for decades. And in that moment, they had to make a choice. They chose silence, one final time. The body was wrapped in cerecloth, placed in a lead coffin, and sealed within hours. No lying in state where people could view the body. No traditional preparations that would require multiple attendants or outside witnesses. Just a quick, efficient, and tightly controlled process that ensured what the attendants saw would never be seen by anyone else. The funeral effigy, a wooden figure dressed in Elizabeth's robes that was displayed at the funeral, showed an idealized version of the Queen, beautiful and serene. The actual body, carrying the truth of her biology, was hidden beneath layers of lead and wood. When the coffin was finally interred in Westminster Abbey, it was placed in the vault with her half-sister Mary I. 2 queens, 2 bodies, and secrets that would remain buried for centuries. But what exactly did those attendants see? Modern medical understanding of chaos provides a clear picture. Externally, the body would have appeared female. Breasts, feminine fat distribution, female genitalia. But internally, the differences would have been impossible to miss. Instead of ovaries and a uterus, there would be undescended testes, typically located in the abdomen or inguinal canal. The vagina would be present but shortened, ending in a blind pouch. There would be no cervix, no uterine opening, nothing that suggested the capacity for pregnancy. For women trained in managing royal pregnancies and births, several of the ladies of the bedchamber had served as midwives to noble births. These anatomical differences would have been immediately recognizable as profoundly unusual, even if they couldn't have named the condition. The scientific evidence supporting the case theory extends beyond the historical observations. Geneticist Dr. Kara Kramer and historian Dr. Katrina Banks-Whitley published a paper in 2011 examining the medical evidence surrounding Elizabeth I. While they focused primarily on possible causes of her health issues in later life, they noted several anomalies consistent with intersex conditions. The complete absence of menstruation despite reaching appropriate age, the unusual pattern of facial hair growth, the inability to conceive despite apparent health, and the physical descriptions suggesting atypical hormonal patterns. Dr. Whitley noted that the historical record contains numerous hints that Elizabeth's body didn't conform to expected female norms, hints that were dismissed or ignored because the alternative was unthinkable. Modern endocrinologists reviewing the same historical evidence have pointed out that case is one of the few conditions that would explain the complete cluster of symptoms: no menses, infertility, facial hair, and external female appearance. The legacy of this secret extends far beyond Elizabeth's death. In the years immediately following 1603, several of the surviving ladies of the bedchamber made unusual provisions in their wills or left strange instructions about papers to be destroyed. Catherine Howard, Countess of Nottingham, who died just 2 years after Elizabeth, left instructions that certain personal documents should be burned unread. Philadelphia Carey, Countess of Derby, established a trust that contained sealed documents not to be opened until such time as truth can be spoken without harm. That trust was eventually dispersed, and those documents lost to history. These weren't the actions of women with nothing to hide. They were the actions of women trying to protect a secret even after death. What did those destroyed papers contain? We'll never know, but we can guess they held first-hand accounts of what those women witnessed in their decades of service. Today, historians and scientists continue debating Elizabeth's biology, though most mainstream historical accounts still reject the case theory as speculative. But the evidence keeps accumulating. Modern forensic techniques could potentially settle the question: DNA analysis of remains, isotope analysis, bone structure examination. However, Westminster Abbey has denied all requests to exhume Elizabeth's body, citing respect for the dead and the sanctity of the tomb. Perhaps that's appropriate. Perhaps some secrets deserve to remain buried. Or perhaps the Abbey authorities, like Robert Cecil 4 centuries ago, understand that some revelations would be too disruptive, would change too much about how we understand history, would force too many uncomfortable questions about legitimacy, identity, and power. The women who kept the secret for 45 years believed that protecting Elizabeth's legacy was worth more than revealing the truth. Maybe they were right. What we're left with is a profound historical mystery, supported by compelling evidence, but impossible to prove definitively without examination of remains that will likely never be allowed. The ladies of the bedchamber took their secret to the grave, but they left just enough traces: cryptic diary entries, unusual will provisions, fragmentary accounts of peculiarities, that we can piece together what they saw. England's greatest queen, the woman who defeated the Spanish Armada, who presided over a golden age of literature and exploration, who crafted the religious settlement that ended decades of bloodshed, may have been biologically male with a condition that gave her a female appearance. The women closest to her knew this truth and chose to protect her anyway. Not out of deception, but out of love, loyalty, and understanding that greatness transcends biology. 423 years after Elizabeth's death, their secret finally has a scientific explanation. Whether that makes it more or less remarkable is something each of us has to decide for ourselves. If this investigation into one of history's most closely guarded secrets fascinated you, I need you to do 3 things right now. First, subscribe to this channel. We're uncovering historical mysteries that mainstream sources won't touch, using modern science to solve centuries-old questions, and you don't want to miss what we're investigating next. Second, leave a comment telling me which historical figure you think we should examine next, because your suggestions directly shape our content. And third, hit that like button, because engagement tells me you want more deep-dive historical investigations that combine forensic science with archival research. This kind of content takes weeks of research to produce, and your support makes it possible. The ladies of the bedchamber kept their secret for 45 years. Let's make sure their story finally gets the attention it deserves.